This is God's Word for Sunday, September 26, 2021. Today's sermon is the 179 episodes of the 4th Chronological Bible Exposition. The text of the Bible is the book of Jude, and the book of Revelation. The title is, My Dear Children, I Am With You. To this day, we have read the epistles of the Apostle John. We looked up to the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd books of John. From the 29th of April till now, over 3 years, and 5 months. From creation, we have run almost to the end of the New Testament. Now the left is the book of Jude, and Revelation. According to the plan, the book of Revelation will be finished in the 3rd week of December. Let's take a good look till the end. Let's look at the book of Jude first. First of all, the most important historical background in understanding the Bible is. It's like the times we've heard over the past few weeks while examining the epistles of John, including 1 and 2 Peter. It should be read with the context of the times in mind. It is believed that the book of Jude was written around AD 70 to 80. If you refer to verse 14, it is quoting the book of Enoch, which is the current regarded not a canon. In the case of the book of Enoch, it was written between AD 30 to 50, so it can be said that it was written after that. Also, when we look at the phenomenon of Gnosticism that has been revealed more since AD 70, since we refer to the Gnostic ideas, and false teachers that we examine through John's epistles in the contents of Jude, and Judas, the author, was martyred between AD 70 to 80. It is dated between 70 and 80 AD. The author of Jude describes himself as a brother of James in this book. Most scholars consider this Judas is the younger brother of Jesus. Chapter 1 verse 1, Judas, a servant of Jesus Christ, and brother of James, to those who are called, loved in God the Father, and kept for Jesus Christ. Judas does not call himself the brother of Jesus in the flesh, but reveals that he is the brother of James. Since James was the head of the Jerusalem church, and was Jesus' physical brother, we can know that the author Judas was Jesus' brother. If you look at the contents of the book of Jude, except for the greetings, and the last praise, all of them refute the Gnostic heresy, and make their sins known clearly. What is different from the other Bibles is that they tell the saints to fight the heresy more strongly. Chapter 1 verse 3, Beloved, while I was eager to write to you concerning the salvation we received in general, I felt the need to exhort you with a letter to the saints to fight hard for the faith that was once given to you. Judas said he was writing to urge believers to solidify their faith and actively counter spiritual heresy. We can think of believing in Jesus as no arguing with each other. In fact, keeping the truth requires more battles. Because Satan attacks believers like a roaring lion. No matter how hard we try to live in peace, as long as there are beings who rush in, and try to kill us. You can't pretend you don't know. The truth certainly doesn't change, but the truth is not to be protected by itself, but to be preserved. Therefore, it is true that saints are like warriors who keep the truth. That is why the Apostle John encourages us to move forward without forgetting the love that God showed us even in such a war. Because the content of Jude is not different from that of 2 Peter or the epistles of John. If you carefully refer to the historical background that has been reviewed several times so far, you will be able to understand the meaning of the book of Jude correctly. The book of Jude contains passages from the no-canon books called Enoch, and the Ascension of Moses. In verse 14, the book of Enoch is quoted, and verse 9 talks about the contents of the document called the Ascension of Moses. These books, as the 66 books of the Bible became canonical books. The Old Testament was canonized in AD 90, at the Jewish Yamnia Conference, and the New Testament was canonized in AD 397, at the Carthage Conference. It was classified as an external or no canon. The Book of Enoch was an ancient text that existed before the first Bible, the Pentateuch, or a story handed down. The Ascension of Moses is a prophetic book about the future of Israel in the way that Moses spoke with Joshua. According to studies of church history, even though the council at Yamnia in AD 90 did not adopt the Book of Enoch as canon. The Book of Enoch was a book that was widely read by believers until the time the New Testament was canonized. Books other than the 66 Book of Canon. Although it is considered low-level because it contains legends and fantastic content from unknown sources, it has always been around the Bible and read by many people. Therefore, even among the fathers of the early church, there were cases of quoting the Apocrypha. In the case of Maccabees, which is included in the Bible by Catholics, because you can also refer to the historical background related to the Jewish Maccabees revolution. By discerning and referring to these apocryphal sutras, it will help you to better understand the biblical background from various angles. Jude. The word of truth that God has given will not change, but if the saints don't keep it, interrupted by beings who add, subtract, and interpret that truth at will, it warns you that you will lose even the reason for existence. It is telling that the saints will fight the battle of truth to keep the true value of the word. If you look at it that way, church and pastor should diligently teach the members about God's truth. The sad thing is, our churches have taught the saints wrong for a long time. Even if you've been to church for a long time, countless people follow false truths that have no historicity, no universality, and no ethics as real. In other words, they did not properly educate the saints. So, what we have to do as a church, and a saint is, we repent that our churches have not taught the Bible properly. The Bible and history should be taught correctly. In the olden days, many people were not educated, people didn't know how to write, and didn't have many books. Today the problem is different. They all have high academic backgrounds, have many good books, have textbooks, and have time. If the saints only want to learn right through the dedication of time, you can become a whole and healthy saint. Now, in the final period of the completion of the prophecies of the Bible, we do not forget the important reason why these apostles' writings were delivered to us. Apply the words of the Bible, and learn quickly. Also tell. I hope that the fulfillment of the new covenant will be accomplished by planting the heart of the Lord in each person's heart. Now, in this way Jude also is warning to false teachers who confuse the gospel in the church, challenging saints to keep the value of the word without being swept away by this atmosphere. If you read the content, you will understand. This concludes the book of Jude. Well then. Now finally, the last book of the Bible is the book of Revelation. Congratulations to everyone who came from Genesis to hear the Revelation. There are parts of the Bible that sometimes talk about the end times. It's literally part of the story. Here the book of Revelation clearly shows the whole picture of the end times. That is why, when learning about the end times, it is very important to see the whole through this book of Revelation rather than any other Bible. I'll be reviewing this book of Revelation several times in the future. Through the book of Revelation, we know the heart of God who wants to speak to us living in the tribulation of this earth as the eternal people of the kingdom of heaven. I hope you can have the right eschatological thinking. In order to properly understand the book of Revelation, first, let's look at the historical background in which the book of Revelation was written. However, it is the same background that we have already reviewed, and known over and over while dealing with the Bible in the days of the latter-day apostles, including the epistles of John. It wouldn't be that special. That era is. It would not be an exaggeration to say that Rome ruled the world. Of course, there were China and India in the east at that time, but when talking about this Mediterranean power, it was a time when Rome ruled almost the whole world. Christians were initially persecuted by Judaism, but the reason why they were increasingly persecuted by the Roman government. This can be attributed to the difference between the Roman Empire's worldview and religious views. Why did the Romans despise Christianity? It is not because Christianity claims that man is a god. There was no problem with this part for the Romans, who also thought that the emperor, human, was a god. The problem is that the person whom Christians worship, a contemptuous criminal, a Galilean villager who died on the cross. Rome deified man, but only those who left such great achievements as the emperor were deified. From the Romans' worldview, at least a being capable of conquering the whole world, and bringing wealth and peace to them could be considered a god. Christians. From the Romans' point of view, it's not common to see a countryman Jesus. Because he is called the Prince of Peace, the Savior, the Son of God. This is the part that came into direct confrontation with the religious culture of Rome, their worldview, and the universal values of their society. So the biggest problem was imperial worship, which emphasizes loyalty to the Roman Empire. By the second half of the 1st century, the time we are looking at now, the cult of the emperor became the heart of the Roman state religion. Prior to the separation of religion and state, Roman loyalty to the gods was regarded as loyalty to Rome itself. Emperor worship has actually become one of the national religions from the time of Emperor Augustus, Octavian, the first Roman emperor. Loyalty to the emperor immediately became the standard by which loyalty to the empire was tested. The emperor worship was originally originated from the system of worshipping leaders of the Greek kingdom in the East. As the Romans conquered Greece, they became aware of the Greek custom of treating the king as a god with the power to impart blessings. The Roman generals who conquered the Greek area received the same reverence from the Greek locals. The Romans traditionally refused to worship humans. However, as these cultures were accepted through the Greek conquest, things related to emperor worship began to occur for the first time during the reign of Emperor Augustus. The Roman Senate gave Octavius the name Augustus, meaning exalted. It means sublime, awe-inspiring, in 27 BC, giving him a status higher than mortal, and inferior to deity. Then he died in AD 14. The Roman Senate elevated him to the status of a god. As long as the emperor is not excommunicated by the Senate, or disregards Roman traditions, and demands that he worship himself during his lifetime. When the emperor died, the Senate granted the deceased emperor the status of a god. For example, the unpopular Emperor Tiberius did not gain the status of a god. Emperor Caligula, Nero, and Domitian did not become gods. All of these people had different conditions of worship that did not fit the Roman way of thinking. Because they demanded it themselves while they were alive. We know each other clearly that we are human, regardless the emperor's power, serving himself as a god while he is alive. Of course, it is bound to collide with the general thinking of people. So in the case of Nero and Domitian, for their wrongdoing, they were officially convicted by the Senate, and even sentenced to record extinction sentences. Records of them are even wiped out from history. In any case, the emperor worship. There is more development in the realms and provinces governed by Rome. As a result of trying to get the emperor's attention by building a temple to worship the emperor like a kind of favor. It is said that in Asia under the rule of Rome, the rulers of the region took the lead in promoting the worship of the emperor. In such an atmosphere, having a temple directly recognized by the emperor it became a great honor for the city where the temple was located, and for its state. So even within a state, in each city, the competition to build a temple was competitive. The legislatures and legislators who wished to develop their city. He showed fervent loyalty to the Roman emperor, and tried to flatter him. So, naturally, the interest of the state legislature and local officials. The focus was on figuring out who did not pay the emperor proper homage. 3 of the 7 churches mentioned in Revelation, Pergamum, Ephesus, and Smyrna, had temples for the worship of the emperor. These backgrounds provide a good basis for interpreting the book of Revelation. The Apostle John wrote the book of Revelation for the churches in Asia Minor in the 1st century. The emperor worship is the Christian who could never worship the emperor by the standards of the word. Inevitably there was a clash with the local ruler who promoted the emperor worship. Ultimately, it became the starting point of a clash with the highest levels of Roman authority. This issue of imperial worship became the most acute issue during the reign of Emperor Domitian. He was the last emperor of the Flavian dynasty, started in AD 69 by Emperor Vespasian, who became a recognized emperor after Nero. It is said that Emperor Vespasian actively promoted emperor worship in order to establish his dynasty, and secure the loyalty of each province. Although Titus, who conquered his first son Jerusalem, did not reign long. The second son, Domitian, reigned 15 years, AD 81 to 96. Roman historians say Domitian. He is portrayed as an autocratic monarch who was obsessed with his own deification. According to records, Domitian demanded that he be called Lord, and God. The period of his reign. It was, of course, the worst time for Christians. The last 4 years of his reign, 93 to 96 AD, went to extremes, in which severe persecution of Christians was imposed. In particular, the very severe persecution of Christians in Asia Minor during the reign of Domitian. There was also the megalomania of Emperor Domitian. As I said before, it was the result of a competition between each region for over-loyalty through the worship of the emperor. Because Domitian gives the privilege of building a temple that he approves in the region of Ephesus in Asia Minor. Because of the tyranny of local officials who tried to show their allegiance to Rome in Ephesus at that time. In particular, severe persecution, and persecution against Christians. It is said that it was indeed a horror itself. At that time, the Apostle Paul, and other apostles of Jesus had already been martyred. As an apostle, only John remained. He was ministering in the church in Ephesus. John's last years were spent under the reign of Domitian. Even if this Domitian was still alive, he insisted on worshipping himself that as a god. During this time, the second persecution of Christians continued to be very severe. It is at this historical time that the book of Revelation is written. The Roman eyes on Christians at that time. Unlike those who serve idols that are so common to them. Christians who believed in an invisible God, and that only one, were viewed as atheists. The Greco-Roman world is more than a polytheistic world. The Greek poet Hesiod claimed that there were more than 30,000 gods. Gods such as Zeus, Artemis, Apollo, etc. They were the central beings of the gods they served. Greece, Rome, Egypt, Syria. Even the various gods that had been worshipped in all countries were accepted, and coexisted together. Most cities had 15 to 20 major temples. Besides these gods, there were a huge number of miscellaneous gods. Each god had a shrine, and worshippers. However, Christians in particular did not believe, and did not acknowledge the existence of various gods that all people of that era recognized, and believed in. Along with Jews, Christians. They believed in only one God, and no other gods were treated as gods. That's why the Romans saw such Christians as atheists. To have such an anti-Roman religious view is to reject the Roman government. It was seen as a rebellion against the emperor. Another of the Romans' perceptions of Christians, they recognized Christians as savage beings who offered human sacrifices. Christians were obliged to celebrate the Holy Communion that Jesus commanded. When Jesus had the Last Supper with his disciples the night before his arrest, sharing bread and wine, he said, "This is my body and blood." Let us not forget that the age of the Old Covenant, made with the blood of animals, is over, and the age of the New Covenant, made through the shedding of Jesus' blood, has begun. He told us to do it until the Lord comes again. But the Romans misunderstood this communion. Misunderstood that these people offer human sacrifices, and eat human blood, and flesh. Even lies were spread, such as offering their children as such sacrifices. So, even if natural disasters such as hunger, epidemics, and earthquakes occur, shifting the blame to these Christians due to all the gods of Rome are angry. It can be said that it was a way of putting on all social responsibility. This was the universal perception of the Romans toward Christians. But even Emperor Domitian stepped in, and forced to worship the emperor. All the cities promoted to be right in order to look good to such an emperor. Because Christians didn't follow that imperial worship. More misunderstandings. The persecution and suffering they suffered were too severe. The believers experienced very severe persecution during the former Emperor Nero. If Christians were martyred, they could just be beheaded. But these Romans didn't see Christians as normal people. It's not just killing, they were brutally tortured to death in order to terrorize others, and prevent them from rebelling. They let the hungry beasts devour people. Crucifixion, burning. It was the worst way to kill fearfully. In particular, the region of Asia Minor, Ephesus, in the time of Domitian, as mentioned several times. In connection with the worship of the emperor, local officials were more focused on over-loyalty to win the construction of the emperor's shrine. Christians take what they see. Forced labor or, as a good example, church leaders must have been tortured, and killed in horror. Therefore, the ministers of each church in Asia Minor, centered on Ephesus, would be the first to be arrested, so it must have been the most terrifying. At that time, not only the clergy but all the saints had to be overcome with extreme anxiety and fear. So, if you have this kind of atmosphere when you believe in Jesus, even if you went to church, of course, there would be people who deny the faith out of extreme fear. At the time of Emperor Nero's persecution, I suffered so much, and believed that Jesus would come. What are you coming for? It's a lie. And then there are people leaving the church. On the other hand, there must have been people who were waiting for the second coming in an extreme way, saying that he would surely come this time. In this way, the church and members of that era are engulfed in confusion in the great fear of persecution. But if you look at history, the persecution of this Emperor Domitian, it was only the second of 10 persecutions. In the next 200 years, there will be 8 more severe times. 3.5 years under Emperor Nero, 7 years under Emperor Domitian, 20 years under Emperor Trajan, more than 20 years under Emperor Hadrian, 20 years under Emperor Marcus Aurelius, 10 years under Emperor Septimius Severus, 2 years under Emperor Maximinus, 3 years under Emperor Decius, 4 years under Emperor Valerian, 8 years under Emperor Diocletian Galerius. Thus, it was about 100 years of tribulation and persecution, including the period of persecution during the 250 years of Roman rule, until Christianity was officially recognized by Constantine in AD 313. Among them, the persecution of Domitian was the second persecution, the second of 10. In a situation like this, who is most worried and heartbroken? Saint. Minister. It may be, but, above all else, the God who made this church, the God who gathered the saints into the church. But because of that church, he is a God who must see the suffering of his children in that church. God the Father. Now because of these vicious people, when you need to see the suffering children in the church you have gathered, it is the most heartbreaking and painful one. Our Jesus, who knows this future history and pain, is the most heartbreaking. So, if we look at the beginning of Revelation 1, God first prepares a solution, made known to Jesus through angels, showing John the visions and revelations. It can be seen that the letters were written to comfort the clergy of each church, and to help the members stand in a stronger and more concrete hope. So, the book of Revelation is the heart of God, in which Heavenly Father's sorrow for his children is written. If such persecution is likely to happen, God uses his almighty power to get rid of the perpetrators of persecution. I think we should raise good kings. God doesn't work that way. Why? I don't know. But the Bible shows us this. God is not a measure to get rid of the coming tribulation, and the great test to come. Let the saints have faith in the hope of God's promises. It must be well remembered that God makes you walk according to the value of the word. That is why God commands the people to hold on to God's promises and hopes. Don't forget that the saints are sent into darkness to illuminate the dark world by being called to be the light. So, the rough and difficult waves coming to the saints are natural. It is natural for Christians to be persecuted by the world who are walking contrary to the path God has called them to take. Therefore, rather than trying to avoid persecution, praying for the strength to overcome difficulties, and the hope to move forward in the dark becomes a prayer that is according to God's will. Persecution is scary, but the lack of hope is even more depressing. So Jesus said to his people who are afraid of persecution, a bigger hope. A precious hope that cannot be exchanged for life. Just as he made known the eternal hope, the true hope, through the Apostle Peter, he speaks of the true hope of the saints. People do not fall because of persecution and suffering, but because of lack of hope. In fact, persecution is perhaps an opportunity to make people more pure and holy. The persecution that comes to those who hold on to hope. Rather, it gives them the strength to hold on to their hope even stronger. So, God does not remove the persecution from the people, but makes them know a firmer hope. At that time, how did you convey hope to the people? By having the Apostle John write a letter. So, the fact that this book of Revelation of John is also a letter conveying hope to the saints in persecution and tribulation. Let's not forget that it is a letter of hope that God sends to the saints. So I'll look into it in the future. In chapters 2 and 3, he said to the 7 churches in Asia Minor to write a letter to each church. You can see each church in detail, and see the work of God that is guarding it. God looks at us like the pupil of his eye. God knows this reality we are walking through. Like the fact that you're with me. Where is your greatest hope? So, looking at the message delivered to the 7 churches in Asia Minor, which suffered the most persecution, he did not tell us how to avoid persecution. Dare to follow the value of the word like light and salt. First, follow Jesus who walked on that path. At the end of the road we can see what tells us that we have a true hope in heaven. And from chapters 4 to 22, many visions and revelations are shown to the Apostle John. It also comforting and encouraging the saints who are trembling in fear. It is not a way to escape from the path of persecution. Giving hope to walk the path of true truth. Let's examine the book of Revelation, remembering that it is a letter from Jesus. Why I keep asking to keep in mind the fact that it's a letter is because the book of Revelation, the last book of the New Testaments, is the most difficult book in the Bible, and has caused many misunderstandings and speculations in the history of the book. The book of Revelation has always been a difficult book from the day it was written till now. The book of Revelation has always been difficult to the extent that no biblical scholar or theologian would say that it is not difficult. Historically, many people have interpreted the book of Revelation for the correct interpretation, but it is true that there is almost no agreement, and even reading it is not convincing. In the case of the reformer Martin Luther, he looked at the book of Revelation, and said that it is a book with as many riddles as the number of words written inside it. Even the reformers would say that, who would have dared to read the book of Revelation correctly? Also, in the case of John Calvin, a truly great theologian in the history of Christianity. He was actually a person who preached step by step without leaving out a single verse since Genesis. I've done all of Revelation 3. And from the 4th chapter, he raised his H, and saying I honestly don't know. If you look at what Calvin, who has an excellent intelligence who can say that he laid the foundation of Christian theology, said it was difficult. It made me think that the book of Revelation is a very difficult book, and that it cannot be unraveled. So, naturally, the book of Revelation was implied by itself in such a way that it is a ridiculously difficult book. If you touch it carelessly, it will happen. A lot of pastors did not touch it by saying, even if you don't know the book of Revelation, there is no hindrance to salvation. In fact, even if we don't know the book of Revelation, it doesn't mean that there is no big problem in our faith. Revelation is. No one can solve it right. It was treated like a book that could not even be solved. Nevertheless, the methods that have been tried to solve the book of Revelation are. Because most of them were solved based on the wrong eschatology, certain prejudices arose, and it could be said that the book of Revelation was difficult to see. If you have the wrong point of view, of course, you will inevitably lead to over-interpretation or unreasonable interpretation. So, the perspective of looking at the book of Revelation was not flexible. If you have such a biased view that is biased towards one side. In fact, not only the book of Revelation, but also the other books, the core of what they are trying to convey is not visible. Even when we read the Bible, if our point of view is too strong, it is like not hearing the voice of God. If there is a view of looking at the Bible for digging for some kind of blessing, naturally, we are bound to misunderstand, and interpret the Bible differently, no matter how easy it is. Either left or right, or, if you are obsessed with stereotypes or, God's will is invisible. Therefore, the perspective of looking at the book of Revelation was not flexible. Also, the reason why it was difficult to even read the book of Revelation. It was because they lacked a proper understanding of the Old Testament. It's not just that you don't know the book of Revelation. The promise of this revelation has continued until it is given to us. Because they did not know the history of the Bible very well. If we look at the history of the Bible we have looked at so far, most of the history of the Old Testament is. The history of the New Testament is only about 100 years from the time Jesus was born on this earth. So many parts of Revelation, such as the conclusion of the Bible, events in the history of the Old Testament. Because we are talking about connected results over time. It uses many visions, and examples based on Old Testament history. But about that Old Testament. It's all over now by the coming of Jesus. Learning as if it had nothing to do with us living in the New Testament, you don't know anything about the introduction, and the body for the results which is the revelation. This means that the book of Revelation, which can be called the conclusion of the Bible, could not have been viewed even more correctly. If you do not know the history of the Old Testament, the book of Revelation is really invisible. That is why we must faithfully, and properly examine the history of the Bible from creation to Revelation. You will have an eye to properly see the book of Revelation, the concluding story of the Bible. To sum up, the book of Revelation tells the people who are afraid, and trembling by the threat of death, and social isolation that comes when they say they believe in Jesus in the field of life. God nevertheless gave the reason why the saints lived like the people of heaven, and to make us aware of the calling that exists on this earth, He gives us the hope to live like a saint. With the courage of faith. It's not a way to compromise with the world's persecution. To make you walk on the path of truth with eternal life. It is a letter of hope that God sent to His people. The blessing of us living in this age today. Even if we had a preconceived notion about the book of Revelation, and viewed it as just difficult from an inflexible point of view. Nevertheless, the worries, and research of the seniors of faith. The steady obedience of those who want to hear God's will. It has allowed us to understand the book of Revelation more correctly. Also, as time went by, we saw how the history of the Bible was fulfilled according to the word in time. About what our seniors of faith in the past said it was difficult, and impossible. Fortunately, we are able to see it a little more clearly. Don't forget this. Do not forget that the book of Revelation is a letter of hope directly sent by God to those who are anxious, and afraid in this world. Let's read the book of Revelation carefully for a month or two in the future, and look at it properly together.